fairy morning or magical midnight, wherever, whenever you may be, across the dimensions or around the vibrations. I'm Tilly Treadwell, and oh, have I got a show for you. Won't you join us on The Weird Walk Home? Welcome, everyone, or welcome back. I'm Tilly Treadwell, and today I have with me returning guest Joshua Cutchin. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm I'm doing better than I thought I was. I think that's the best way to put it.
Oh, I think
Yeah,
that's a great start, if nothing
yeah.
else. So, my friend, today I know that we're going to be talking about human to non human relationships in the past and how it ties into fairy lore and your book, Thieves in the Night. And I'm really excited to talk about that. But for anyone who might be new, they might not know who you are. Could you please give us like the 15 to 30-second elevator pitch about who you are, where you've been, where you're going?
Okay, well, depending on whether or not you count multi-volume entries as separate books, I'm the author of about seven non-fiction books on paranormal and the supernatural. A lot of my work, as I'm sure we'll get into today, talks about the intersection between fairy folklore and UFO encounters. And I am currently working on putting together a class on near-death experiences that I'll be teaching at the end of March. So I wear many hats. I just got through Mardi Gras season, which is another aspect of busyness in my life that we haven't talked about. Because, the two times in my year when I'm most busy as a musician are Mardi Gras and Oktoberfest because I play tuba. Um, and while I stay pretty busy throughout the rest of the year, I average about four gigs a month. Mardi Gras can see that double, and Oktoberfest can see that double. So anyway, it's been a very busy season of life, but hopefully we're sort of on the downhill slope in that regard, at least in certain areas. Yeah.
Hex, yeah. So, if anyone wanted to join the near death experiences class, where or how could they do that?
Well, it's being taught through an organization called the Cosmos Institute. That's Cosmos with a K, KOSMOS, and you can go to cosmosinstitute.org. It is a 9 class course of 90 minutes each. So each class is an hour and a half long. And classes will begin on March 23rd. And I believe enrollment goes right up to the day of. So people can head on over to cosmosinstitute.org. That's Cosmos with a K, and they can find more information there. And it seems to I don't have enough nice things to say about the people behind the organization and everything. The professionalism and the ease of working with them and the kindness has been top notch. So really looking forward to bringing that to people. It's going to be a bit of an odd near death experience course. There's a version of this course that could take all 9 classes just to discuss the different aspects of near death experiences. Like you spend an entire class on life reviews, an entire class on out of body experiences or whatever. But that's not my approach. My approach is much more in line with taking the near death experience and seeing what it says about just all sorts of threshold experiences in general, from an archetypal standpoint, and how they all sort of fit together in what I view as uh, this puzzle that is our relationship with the more than human world.
I like that. I think that's great. Maybe I'll have to go check that out for myself. So I know that death is often related also to the fairy world and to aliens, and sometimes even the dead human people have been seen amongst the fairies and the aliens. This leads me personally to believe that we're all related and deeply interconnected, and that birth and death might actually be essentially the same thing, just with a slightly different flavor. What do you think about that, though?
I mean, I definitely do. It's kind of interesting. In working on Ecology of Souls, which was making the exact same points that you alluded to, my two book work, um, it became apparent that if you sort of it became apparent that the phenomenon's obsession with procreation which I think you can see in a lot of these different things. You know, fairies used to abduct people as spouses, and the number of Bigfoot stories that well, you know, Bigfoot did the same thing, but there's, you know, this odd subset of encounters where people are being intimate at lovers' lanes, and the Bigfoot is seen peeking through the car. And of course, you know, the whole hybridization angle with the modern UFO stories. There is an obsession of the phenomenon with reproduction, but if it has an obsession with reproduction, it makes some sense that it has an obsession with death as well, because these are arguably, you know, two sides of the same coin. Um, as you alluded to, you know, well, basically the entire, almost the entire second book in the Ecology of Soul series is looking at the connections between death and the UFO literature, but it's really explicit in the fairy stuff. I mean, a lot of these cultures prior to the rise of theosophy in the late 19th century associated fairies with death in some capacity. Now, sometimes it would be that you would die and go among the fairies, or that you would die and become a fairy. It's not entirely clear, but there was definitely always a relationship perceived there. You know, in some of the stories that I talked about in my first book, A Trojan Feast, people would be warned not to eat or drink the food whenever people went to fairyland, and in a lot of those narratives, the person who's doing the warning is, you know, a relative or a member of the community who passed away the year before and is saying, "Hey, I'm stuck here right now too." So there's always been this sort of connection between these things. What's really interesting that points directly to what you were talking about, the relationship between sort of death and birth in these fairy legends is can be found here and there as well. I mean, there are allusions in some of the literature to the fairies laughing at funerals and crying
I
at
was
birth.
literally going to address that next.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, like the impression that you get if you look at this stuff long enough, at least that was my impression, is that like there's some sort of revolving door, you know, between here and there, and you know, I think entry into one life represents the death from another, or it could be interpreted that way. It's also interesting that there's this entire subset of stories that you'll find throughout Western Europe of the folklorists call them midwife to the fairies narratives, where there's a midwife who is called upon oftentimes by a sort of mysterious dark rider, someone, you know, cloaked all in black on a black steed, and they are taken to the house of something. You know, sometimes it's a fairy, sometimes it's a troll, sometimes it's a dead human being, appropriately enough, who is giving a fairy birth, and the midwife has been called upon to offer her services. And so there is sort of the idea, sort of an inversion on what you can see in the behavior of certain figures, the psychopomps, which are, you know, those who lead human beings from this life into the next. It's kind of like humans serve that same purpose for the fairy folk in these narratives as well. And it's part of that, I think, really elegant expression of how these phenomena seem to reflect themselves. And sometimes they reflect themselves in an inverted way. So you've got human beings caring for fairy births and some allusions to fairies caring for, sorry, human beings facilitating fairy births, and you find allusions to fairies sort of facilitating human death transitions. And I think it's really elegant the way that sort of ends up inverting and flipping. Two other examples of this before I let you talk and I stop rambling. Um, you know, it's interesting. You can make comparisons between fairies and aliens all day long, but I do think it's interesting. This is something that Patrick Harper pointed out in his book Demonic Reality. If you listen to the ufologists, the aliens are always coming, 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 but never here. And if you look at sort of the body of fairy folklore, ever since Geoffrey Chaucer, there have been allusions to the fairies, you know, leaving our world, you know, the fairy exodus. It's kind of what you see in The Lord of the Rings with, you know, the fairies moving into the west. They're always going, 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 but they're never gone. So it's not the same idea. It's literally the exact opposite, but I think it's the same expression of that motif. Another good example of that is you can make pretty extensive connections between near-death experiences and the alien abduction uh, phenomenon. But one thing that's always absent, or often absent, because I have found a couple of outliers, but one thing that's often absent from the alien abduction scenario that is not um, consistent with near-death experiences is something like a life review, where you see images of your past life. But what you do get in these alien narratives is sort of a preview of cataclysms that are going to befall the Earth. So instead of a review of the past of the individual, you get a preview of the future of the collective, which I think is it's so diametrically opposed to the other thing that I think it's kind of inversion is representation in this sort of capacity. So that's one of those things that you kind of have to look for, I think,
Right.
when you're making these comparisons, is that when something is so inverted on every single point, it almost is the same thing, contrarily enough.
Mhm. I agree with you, and one of the reasons that I have admired you and wanted to work with you is that I think you have a brilliant mind, that you've not experienced any of these things, but you put together all of these pieces, and you're doing it outside of the typical UFO narrative, which says that these other people are completely foreign to our Earth, and they're coming here from millions of miles away, and they're flying in aluminum spaceships. And of course, this is just generalized. This is just me
Right.
talking heads. But I appreciate your take on this because I completely agree with what you're saying, and I've even experienced that. And two, I think that birth and death are especially important to, some could say, the fairy people, although I don't think that there are necessarily separations of fairies and aliens and human. I think that we're all family and we're just in different life stages and different genetic profiles. That's just my take on it. But I think that birth and death is really important to a lot of these other people because what I have understood and what some have told me in back in my paranormal investigation days is that birth and death relate directly to genetic profile, genetic density, and incarnate journey. So, human people apparently have a very specific moral and like social code, and they're here temporarily. They have a thicker veil of amnesia, but other types of people apparently do not. They also have more access to time and how it operates and risk assessment. There are a lot of things apparently, and learning how to manipulate birth and death directly relates to helping or hindering humankind, as well as being able to incarnate here to take advantage of and to enjoy certain mortal sensations and benefits, like
Right.
eating. Makes sense.
Mhm.
Which is
Well,
why
it's
food
it's
is a big
it,
deal, as you've discussed.
it's sort of like that Eastern belief that each human being is an attempt by the universe or creator to experience itself, to sort of reflect back and look at itself. And part of that is to experience what it's like to be embodied, in this reality. Um, I'm completely on board with what you said. I think that it's frustrating that you have to throw around these labels, and I use the term alien and fairies all the
Yeah.
time for their respective, mythologies. But I do think that it's all just a shoddy attempt to try and label things that we don't have the capacity to accurately describe. Um,
Yeah.
and that idea that it should be viewed as more of a continuum rather than uh,
Flash,
discrete
flash,
camps
flash.
of yeah. I really resonate with that. Yeah, I mean, I am sympathetic to what you just said because there are some people who will view this control in a sinister way, or this manipulation, or whatever you want to call it, in a sinister way. But that just doesn't. Something about that doesn't quite feel right to me. Um, and I think that viewing these presences as stewards, I think is probably more accurate. Um, at least, if you look at the whole of interaction. And again, not saying that you can't have bad experiences. I think we talked about that a bit last time. But the other thing that we don't do a good job of, especially in the modern West, is understanding that some of the best things can grow out of some of the worst experiences.
That was literally my next point.
There you go. We're on the same wavelength. I mean, yeah, if you talk to anybody, in recovery, myself included, like the day that you're checked in is like the worst day, the rock bottom worst thing that's ever happened to you. But it's only from that position that that you can actually have growth. It's the same idea of, you know, it's just the rebirth narrative, that you see everywhere, that you see in agriculture, and then the incidents of forest fires that clear way for new growth and all this sort of things. Like it's just in order to have, or even when you sit down to eat, I mean that's
Uh-huh.
in order for to have growth, there has to be destruction. Like even if you're vegan, there's an impact on what you're eating. Like what you're eating was once alive.
Mhm.
So, I think that's something that you can be extrapolated to the macro position of one's life. Yeah. And if it can be extrapolated to that, you'd think that it could be extrapolated to the passage of soul or spirit energy, the literal building blocks of the way reality works too.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more, my friend. And I like to try to encourage people that even if they are, like, God forbid, quote unquote, say they're being haunted or tormented by a demon, or there is something really negative going on, I try to encourage people to think about it this way, that the negative experiences that you are having right now, or the negative people that you have right now, they are there to possibly teach you something. It just depends on where you are choosing to put your focus and how objective and open minded you are. So, I mentioned to you that we're moving out of a haunted house, right? If you're down for a crazy story, I would like to tell you. Are you cool with
Please.
that?
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
So
I love crazy stories.
awesome. So the reason my under eyes are puffy and I just seem like probably a little extra flat, I am exhausted with this house, man. 3 years ago, we moved into this place, and I'm very sensitive to energy and all of that. I come in and I do sleep. I'm like, all right, it's not like the best, but it's definitely not the worst. I can work with this. About a year and a half ago, we started having problems in the bedroom, which funny enough, I'm literally sitting right next to it. I have the door open to keep my eye on it because that's how active this has gotten. We started having seemingly random negative haunting issues. I have never had these problems, despite everything that I've gone through, and despite even working with so-called demons and whatnot. I've never had anyone give me any problems, you know. So we start having these issues. And do you know anything about Aleister Crowley and what he experienced in one of his, like, seance things?
Not that particular incident, no. Although if you describe it, it might ring a bell. But
He
I
said that
I try to keep Crowley at arm's length for a lot of reasons. Like, it's like I feel like when you're interested in this stuff, you're going to learn about aspects of Crowley through osmosis, and I do find the fact that he set up shop on the shores of Loch Ness to be really interesting, and the stuff with
yeah,
Jack Parsons interesting. But as far as like actually reading Crowley or trying to memorize what's happened to him, yeah, I'm like, okay, you stay over there, please.
yeah,
Yeah.
completely fair.
But yeah.
Okay. Then if you don't know what I'm talking about, let's just leave Curly out of it. I one night about a year and a half ago had a visit from someone who claimed to visit to have visited him. If you're aware of Blue or Lamb, that's the
Hmm.
entity that I'm talking about. I've never had stuff like this happen before. My husband was legitimately seeming to be in a trance. And then this being came through to talk to me in the dimmed light of the room. And then we started having electrical interferences. I took care of that instance. myself, because my husband, he's about as psychic as a stale ham sandwich, which is fine.
Sounds like me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically. But and never before had a more negative entity been able to come through to me like that. And it was trying, he was, I should say, he was trying to recruit me after he had disrespected me and disrespected my husband. And then we had all of the electrical occurrences. And then about a month ago, well, no, I should say, I had an experience in the closet with like a little gray type creature looking out at me. Like one night I had one looking out from behind the curtains, another night, and then this last month, it was just the final straw. We were trying to sleep, and we always have like a playlist. You know how on YouTube they have the ambient types things. We always had that on. I always leave on a nightlight because I know it interrupts people coming through and things like that. Well, middle of the night, we are both sound asleep. We hear this massive explosion, and it's coming from the TV. YouTube has switched our ambient video to a program literally about the apocalypse. And we were hearing a bomb go off on the TV. And then the TV says, and there was massive destruction in a like a deep boom. It scared us to death. I know it's funny now, like looking
Yeah,
back on
yeah.
it, right?
Well, it's funny. It's funny in the juxtaposition of,
Yep,
the peaceful playlist versus,
exactly.
the
Exactly.
apocalypse. Yeah.
Exactly. And then both of our devices would not reconnect to the TV. We've never had anything like this happen before, especially not it switching to a program about the freaking apocalypse. So that was I think our last night there. I'm still so tired. I'm having just it's been a mess getting everything moved out of that room. I've started spraying it every day with Florida water. We keep it sectioned off and everything. Um, yeah, that's right. So like the day or so after that,
Wait, hold on. What's Florida water?
oh, Florida water. So Florida water it's technically a type of cologne, but it's used also in voodoo for
Okay,
cleansing and
okay,
for
okay.
bringing the
Gotcha. Okay,
vibration.
gotcha.
I seal the doorway now every single day
Hmm.
in the morning with the Florida water. My husband does it at night. We only go in there as much as possible during the daytime when it's sunny so that there's like less chance of activity. This was only the half of it though. The next day, there were thousands of mayflies that came pouring out of the door frame, an unsealed door frame from the bathroom to the bedroom over there. And then the bathroom was completely flooded with these things. And it's like they appeared out of nowhere. They were not like typical flies, they were harmless and cute. It still freaked me out.
Yeah, there's where my folks live, there is a tree, like a glorified sapling, right? It's just really pliable.
Yeah.
That the mayflies like to come up off the lake and land on that tree, and you go down there and you shake it, and you just
Yep.
get
Yep.
covered in mayflies. And even though they're completely harmless, and God bless them, they live for a day, so you kind of want to you want to let them have their time, right? But
Exactly.
it can be really overwhelming when they're just in your
Yeah.
face, yeah.
But it was crazy because we've never had an infestation of any bugs like that in this
Right.
house. So my husband, we have no caulking. We have nothing on hand to seal the massive crack in the door, right? He grabs my favorite tube of toothpaste and he seals up the top of this door.
I mean, whatever works. Now it smells minty fresh.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's what we've had going on. And then we thought, oh, we're gonna put the cat's box in there at night. We'll leave the door open. I can keep an eye on it. It's perfectly fine. No. We woke up in the morning. My poor cat had to hold her pee all night because someone had quietly shut that door. And it's been nuts. And then I had another instance. My husband wanted to sleep without doing a bunch of like the things that I would usually do, such as keeping a light on. You can't see it. The bedroom is right there. Our bed is right there in the living room where I'm filming. But I had a negative experience there, and in that bed, and then we have a fan that even when it is turned off now, it has never acted up before. It has been spinning slowly, continuously above our new bed for these weeks. So
Jeez.
it's all connected. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's black mold. I think the reason, by the way, that this is happening in this house now more than ever, especially in the bedroom, we discovered a bunch of black mold. Black mold always lowers vibration, but then also we didn't know it until about like a year ago. But the last tenant's granddad, I'm sorry, our pet sitter's grandfather died in the bedroom where we were sleeping.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting about the black mold, and I think it's something that we as, esotericists or whatever you want to call yourself, um, would do well to realize is that these things, we might have talked about this last time, but these things can be multiple things at once, right? So, if someone has a butterfly land on them and they're convinced that it was their grandmother, like it was just a butterfly, but it was also their grandmother. You know what I mean? Like it depends on who's having that interaction. So for the person, yes, it can be like a completely mundane butterfly, and if they wanted to, they probably wouldn't if they're convinced it's their grandmother. They could grab it and kill it and pin it down if they wanted to. But it also carries that sort of metaphysical meaning as well. And I think that something like black mold doing that makes makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Having that sort
Um,
of dualistic reality to it. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, in the past, a lot of people would say that I was making things up when I would say that certain things lower or heighten vibration. But when I was working as a paranormal investigator with people, I would have the non-human so-called demons tell me these types of things, which this is how I originally came to this type of understanding and theory. But they would catch things on EVP and on camera sometimes of me having this conversation with this other person. And so that is how I came to believe that all of this is seemingly real and accurate.
Mm.
And it in other areas of the house, I never had any kind of negative or questionable encounters ever. It was only about the time apparently when this mold started to develop and
Mm.
when the seemingly the vibration in that bedroom really started to sink, and I couldn't figure it out until more recent. But
Yeah.
I could be nuts. I don't know. Maybe I'm making it all up. Maybe I'm crazy. Please, everyone, use your own use your own brain cells to decide what you think for yourself. But I wanted to say all of this because relating back to thieves in the night, I think that it is all deeply interconnected. And even myself, I don't see death as the mortal death, anyways, as a negative thing. I'm terribly sick right now because of dealing with the black mold and all of the stress of what's going on. But if I were to die today, I'm perfectly okay with that because I realize that my body is temporary and that I'm actually just returning to a higher vibration. And so I empathize and I agree with the non human people who have told human beings in the past, we cry at human births and we rejoice at the funerals. That makes all
Mm.
the sense in the world to me. And my whole life, people have always thought that I'm really weird because I get really uncomfortable and I think it's weird to celebrate. I'm sorry to say, like the birth of a human person who is going to come here and maybe suffer greatly before they pass back. So that's just my opinion. But
Right.
what do you think?
Well, I mean, that's it's one of those things where there are a lot of things in this life where the price of admission for the good stuff is also something awful. Like, getting a pet, like getting a pet is signing a an invoice for heartbreak. You know what I mean? Like, um, everybody that every relationship that you have, the person will either die if the relationship goes well and doesn't, explode in some capacity. Every relationship that you have, the person will die and you'll be sad, or you'll die and they'll be sad. You know what I mean? So it's like everything does have this tinge of sorrow attached to it. But I think it's one of those things where it's looking at how much the positive can outweigh the negative. And it's not necessarily anything revelatory. People have talked about this at length in other capacities, but um there is something to be said for how, the bad stuff highlights and makes the good stuff all that much better. I mean it's the worst part of every fairy tale is they lived happily ever after. You know what I mean? Because it just sounds like a recipe for boredom and tedium, you know.
That is the
Yeah.
human attitude. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
why do you think so many people who have money end up doing like a ton of money, end up either spending it all or getting into trouble with the law, or people who could hire, chauffeurs everywhere they go drive drunk? It's because, there's just this, you have access to all this stuff and you just, everything is there's no excitement anymore. There's, almost, it's almost, when all your needs are met, it's almost a surrender of control, because everything is, anything you want, you can have. It's like that's kind of, it sounds nice for about the first week or month, maybe, I don't know, but like, but then it's like, oh, geez, there's no adversity in my life anymore. I've got to. I think there might be something in the human condition that sort of has to create that.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree 100%. Um, and when I talk to people a good portion of the time, and I point this out about the human condition, a lot of people seem to take it as a super bad thing. But for me, I think it could be utilized in a really healthy way if we teach people how to, say, start farming again, or how to be a blacksmith again, or how to help people in the community who maybe are really struggling and could use a friend or a new father figure, things like that. Of course, within boundaries and balance, but I don't think it has to be a bad thing. It just I find it really interesting that that's exactly where the typical human being goes, where if they have too much, they immediately self-destruct. I find that scary. Oh, you are muted, my friend.
Sorry, sorry, but it's kind of like, I don't remember if we talked about this in our last interview or in our correspondence since then, but it's like the rat utopia experiments,
That's
right?
exactly
Yeah,
it. Yeah, we talked about
exactly
that.
that. Yeah. And it's just something to be on guard for. Yeah, but it does bring up these questions of, that you hear in a lot of circles, and I'm inclined to believe them, but I can't say for sure because I don't have that sort of interaction and knowledge that you do. But the idea that, there are pre-birth agreements and there are decisions to incarnate at specific times. I'm definitely sympathetic to that outlook, although I, obviously can't say for certain. But
Sure.
it does sort of bring that into question. Like, why would you want to eliminate the reason for which you were incarnated on this planet, in this existence?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. And for me, I can say I believe I've had these memories, these experiences, but of course, I could always be just mistaken or have undiagnosed mental issues. So, always with that disclaimer, that's how I proceed. When did I tell you about the near death experience I again seem to have had in April of this past year?
I don't think so, but maybe if you start sharing it, it'll trigger my memory.
Okay, so I'm recovering from some pretty serious medical stuff just in general. But this past April, I had been feeling particularly randomly, seemingly unwell, went to lay down, and was taken up out of my body into a black velvet room where there was a woman talking to me about this life and about if I wanted to stay or if I wanted to go find somewhere that was more in harmony with me so that I could actually make the serious progress that I had wanted to make with the people who said that they wanted my help. Were you familiar with that at all?
I don't think so. I don't think I've heard this.
Okay, okay. I've only told it a few times, so it doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me. I wanted to be sure so I wasn't repeating myself. But yeah, that's what happened. I was not feeling well, and I personally believe that that was a checkpoint, a milestone in my incarnation here, because at that time there were some really serious um social things going on, and I really was just feeling incredibly emotionally defeated and whatnot. And when she took me out of my body, I could not see her, but her voice was all around me, and it felt like she was inside me in a certain sense. I was in this gorgeous bubble of black velvet, and her voice was coming from all over. I had no body, I had no form. I was just purely consciousness, and it was so very comfortable. And she said, things aren't going the way that you wanted them to. And we realize that you have done the very best that you possibly can. And now you're suffering unnecessarily. And if it is too much for you emotionally to handle and bear, we want you to know that we are happy to release you from your incarnation contract, and you can choose somewhere that will be more harmonious and where um, you can make more progress with how you naturally operate and think and how people receive you. And so I sat there just thinking for a moment. I had no emotion about it. I was literally only looking at everything from a purely objective, completely egoless point of view without the trauma. It was wonderful. And she said, I really do need you to make up your mind because our time is short. Your body is winding down. If you want to come with me, I need you to come with me right now and tell me. If you want to return, there is a group of people waiting for you right outside of this room. They will take you back to your body and they will reset your biological clock. And so she wound up telling me, if you return, the deal is that by next spring, mid next spring, your body will be healed. You will be just fine, but it's going to take this next year for you to re-enter the body
Cover.
fully.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for them to take care of what's going on with you. And because I was given the reassurance that I was going to heal, and because I was given the reassurance that there are people helping me and that they're going to reset me in another timeline, which is what she told me, I agreed to come back. And so that was my experience. And I don't talk about it too often because I know how it sounds.
Another timeline. Do you think this is where some of your Mandela experiences come from, or yeah?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even my husband has said that he has dual fully formed memories of certain things. And I've talked to other people. So this is what I
Huh.
believe. I fully believe that there are all of the timelines that can exist, do exist. I believe that there are certain groups and vibrations of timelines and that you can move in between them. And I think that's exactly why I've noticed a lot of the strangeness that I seem to have noticed over my entire lifetime, like the clock face changing on the mantle. I
Right.
think I told you about that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, I've
Yeah,
heard about that. Yeah, I think you mentioned that with Soraya. Yeah.
I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So that's my experience, and that was for me confirmed when this team was helping me come back. But
Mhm.
they warned me, like the woman warned me that it was going to be a difficult journey the following year from that April until this upcoming April, and they weren't kidding. And I'm glad that I've had the
Yeah.
help, because otherwise I just think I would have passed away from the stress.
Well, also what you can accomplish in terms of healing and personal growth when you know that there is insurance
Yeah,
and a plan backing you up is not to be underestimated. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that was my experience, and being able to say like work with people like you and the others that I'm hopefully helping and that are hearing me out finally. I don't feel like I'm wasting my time and my breath
Right.
here
Right.
anymore. But the old paradigm that people would follow in the modern age is just that everything is UFO and it's physical and they're coming here from other planets. And I'm not so sure that is the case.
I mean, here's the thing. It only has to have happened once in human history. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so I'm open to the possibility that over the past 10 or 20,000 years, there has been a civilization that has been advanced enough to visit us. But I don't think that's the bulk of what we've seen historically, and neither do I think it's the bulk of what we see today. Um, yeah, and it's the thing about sometimes I really like to interrogate why I'm doing what I'm doing, you know? And I think at the end of the day, and there's probably a better way for me to do this, but I think at the end of the day, it is to alert people to what I perceive as the fact that there is a more than human world out there, that uh, what they've been sold as materialism being the dominant paradigm, or the dominant nature of our reality is at least incomplete, if not incorrect. And so it does sort of take on the shape of a semi-spiritual quest in terms of uh, undermining this hired reductionist, um, meaningless version of existence that we're sold at, the collective level. Um, and I think that the extraterrestrial hypothesis just plays into that materialist mode of thinking so well, you know. And then you start introducing, I mean, again, panspermia is an idea that I think is interesting and I think it holds some merit and I think it probably has happened. But, once you bring in that aspect of like, oh, we were just seeded here by an ancient, spacefaring civilization, I think well, it's more moving of the goalposts in terms of our fundamental nature and what we are. But also I think it serves to further strengthen that sort of it serves to strengthen a worldview that I find to be kind of nihilistic, which is the idea that the only thing that exists is material, you know. And so like I said, there's probably a better way to do it. There's probably, a Bernardo Kastrup style way to proselytize about idealism as a mode of thinking. But at the same time, I just kind of want to put a crack in people's worldviews and allow for the possibility of these strange things to happen. Because if one of these strange things has happened or can happen, then I think the rest of that materialist view starts to tumble like a house of cards. It really does. You just got to introduce that one little bit of doubt into people, and then they'll start to say, "Oh, well, is this reality what I was always told it was?" And similarly, people always mishear me when I talk about this sort of thing. They're like, well, materialism and science have brought us great things. We can fly across the globe and we've cured diseases that weren't cured. I'm like, look, I'm not denying any of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the analogy that I like to use is that, if you have a black and white movie and you introduce one color, just like let's say green, right? Well, it doesn't take away black or white, but it's no longer a black and white movie. Like there's green in there too. So to me, it's like there are certain things that are material, and this is an idea I've been playing with a lot lately. Is that things have a psychic and a physical dimension.
Yep.
I think that what we interact with, especially ourselves, but what we interact with in this reality is predominantly physical with like, a foot in the psychic. And I think that these other things like UFOs and Bigfoot and the Fae folk, I think they're predominantly psychic with a foot in the physical. Um,
Right. Right.
and I obviously have no way of proving that. It will probably remain speculative long after I die, but that's just what my sense of things is telling me.
Well, I do agree with you about what you said about like the human world and this physical world being mostly physical with a touch of the, you could say, metaphysical, and then vice versa.
Mm.
I don't know if you've seen it. I have started a brand new series on the Weird Walk Home that addresses this exactly and breaks down the scientific material quite literally behind the theory that you just spoke of. And then
There you
I
go.
also am going to be working with the lovely Mr. Steve Mara soon, discussing what I call meta mechanics, so that people hopefully can get a bit of an introduction to this theory and to the what I believe to be proof of it operating here in the everyday of this world. So I don't know, maybe maybe if you take a look at that, it could be a little bit encouraging as
I, I,
well.
I just wrote a note to myself to look into it. Yeah, at the same time, like I feel like as we continue to like talk about things like idealism or like, these other topics of like trying to parse out what part of this is physical and what part of this is psychic, I do get the sense that we're reinventing the wheel and that these ideas have been talked about ad
Yeah,
nauseum for a long time. I mean, it really does come back to me again, all the caveats aside about its misuse over the years in anthropology, it really does come back to me to a worldview that is animist.
yeah,
That even inanimate things have some sort of psychic imprint, some sort of spiritual imprint, some sort of soul. Um, and so it's kind of like, we could try and push the scientific boundaries further with this, or if you're not a scientist like me, you could just say, well, it just seems like, we can sort of shift our focus back to these older modalities of thinking and probably encompass a lot of what we're trying to talk about. So part of this too is there's a certain line of thinking in the supernatural and the paranormal that what we're seeing with something like the alien abduction scenario is what evolution looks like to a conscious animal, right?
hmm
Um, and again, I feel like that flirts a little that falls a little bit too much into that materialist camp, and I think that situating this as a call forward, and please, I would love to have a discussion on this if you disagree. I think situating these things as a call forward falls into these tired tropes of what um progression looks like, what the rise of civilizations look like, this sort of infinite growth model of things.
yeah,
I don't see it as a call forward. I think that's satisfying an impulse that we have been conditioned to embrace in modernity. You know, your
agreed.
company has to have it growth every year, or you're failing.
Agreed.
I feel like it's more akin to that. I view these things not as a call forward, but as a call back into right relation with what we were designed to be and have always been. Um, Obviously, there's sort of I think people mistake transcendence and apotheosis and all these things that come with spiritual enlightenment. I think they conflate that with some sort of evolutionary, to borrow a term from Kenneth Ring, omega point idea. And I think that it's more along the lines of returning to what we have always been, which is this dualistic physical psychic state of being. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely, I do. Actually, literally every experience with non-human people that I've ever had has hammered that exact point home, even the so-called demons. They
Mhm.
told me that the way for these people to not be targeted by them is to raise their vibration up and to live in harmony and truth with themselves and other people. And that to get out of their own way, all that they need to do is be honest and loving. And then there's no more food for that person. So they're not going to haunt that family or that
Right.
person. And that even if, like we were talking about with my black mold situation, if there is enough high vibration emotional goodness going on that they have trouble attaching. So it comes down to the vibration of the people there ultimately, as far as like a personal attachment goes.
Mhm.
And does that make sense?
It does. And I hear you talking about things like the things that you're talking about that deprive these not negative, more maliciously aligned
Hungry.
beings, hungry beings. The things that you're talking about that keeps them away are simple things. They're
Mhm.
fundamental things. It's not about, oh, I need to, you know, evolve in that sense. It's about returning to like what we all know is is within us,
Yep.
that fundamental goodness and that fundamental caring. Which is, why I sort of chafe a little bit about this idea that, and
Mhm.
and that and that isn't to put the what I think the evolutionary model of these experiences is trying to get at, that isn't to put it out to pasture, right? I think
Sure.
that I think that there is something to be said for um, an escalation of enlightenment, an escalation of global love and light, for lack of a better term. But I think it's wrong to fit that into this sort of Darwinist model of things. I think that is really it's not it's not a it's not pulling us into something that we aren't. It's fulfilling something that we are. Does that make
Mhm.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you. It's just the way that I understand it,
Mhm.
the human animal can go one of two ways. And as we discussed with human people, black and whiting things as you've been experiencing yourself, I think this is also how it goes, except that most human people, as I understand, are seeing almost all of this from a materialistic point of view. And I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
that is going to be the human downfall because human people, in my understanding, seem to see growth, as you said, as, oh, you got to open a new shop, you've got to expand
Yeah.
the society and whatnot. But that's not my internal understanding, and that's also not what I have been taught by every single human non-human person that I've ever had the honor to have a talk with. So
Mhm.
what they have taught me over all of the years is that, for lack of a better term, I do not endorse any religion. I don't personally like religion. I think it's toxic. I do, however, think that there are certain gems in certain religions. What they've taught me, the kingdom of God is within you. And so if we can share with ourselves and then other people that alleged love and objectivity and care in just our own tiny little corners, that is how we create paradise here on earth. And I think too that that would also call more like helpful, positive non-human people to want to interact with human people, because that's why there's that meme that aliens fly by earth and lock their doors.
Well, you're right, and
You
and,
know what
and
I'm talking about?
you put me in the mindset of this quote that I recently heard that was attributed to Carl Jung, and they asked him if he thought World War III was inevitable, and his response was, "It depends on how many people can integrate their shadow." It's like,
I agree.
I mean, yeah, it's the only thing that has ever mattered is personal development. But it's not personal development in a selfish way. It's personal development in terms of, again, the relationship between yourself and other, not just, well, people in the sense that you use the term people, But
Yeah, yeah.
other intelligences in the environment and animals and all those things that we normally don't consider people. It's putting yourself in a balanced relationship with all those things. And that does happen at the individual level. That's the only way anything has ever been accomplished is at the individual level. Even collective agreements that have changed the world have been because individuals were committed.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And to tie this back into thieves in the night and genetics and birth and death and theft,
Mhm.
what I have been taught is that human beings have a horrible reputation with almost every other type of non-human person. They see them as cattle, as wild animals to be threatened and controlled because most human beings, as I've been told and taught, they are not rational beings. They are really emotional, really selfish and negative, and that they are an inherent threat. And so, in my understanding, this is why it is said that the fairies are always leaving, leaving, leaving. And this even gets into now talking about what was supposed to be the original topic, hybrids
Right.
and whatnot. They told me that it is considered a suicide mission for anyone to try to integrate with human society unless there are very specific rules that that person lives by to stay safe and sane. Does that make sense?
Hmm. It does. Um, so what is the suicide mission then, from what you've been able to glean?
That human beings would just torture them to death.
But I mean, but what is, I guess,
It's a
so
pointless endeavor.
okay, but I mean, I guess what I'm saying is like suicide missions carry with them the guarantee of failure, but there is a positive outcome that is possible. So what's the positive outcome that is possible in that suicide mission?
Right, right. So what I understand is that there is always the possibility of that person taking on the human or the mostly human form and then either figuring out a way to stay high vibration enough to land him or herself into a timeline or a
Hmm.
group of timelines where human people are kinder. They are more logical, less emotional, less selfish. That is the motivation apparently for any one of them to want to either breed hybrid children or to integrate here, manifest here more long term. But what
Gotcha.
they've
So
told me
it's
is
yeah.
that it is so rare and so difficult because integrating here or manifesting in a permanent like lifetime, a human integrated lifetime because of the laws of the universe, it is extremely difficult to remember your purpose, remember why you chose to come here, and then also to
Right.
hold a high enough vibration that what everyone else is doing and thinking and feeling doesn't affect you enough to either kill you or lower your vibration enough that you're going to suffer and die a slow death. Does that make sense?
It does. So it's a high risk, high reward proposition.
Exactly. And because most of these people, from my experiences, are very I would say balanced in how they approach risk and reward. They don't see it as being a sure enough thing to deal with humanity anymore. Like
Right.
back in the old fairy tale days, they would often interact with human people, and I've been told that it is because human people had more humility. They were less selfish because they had to rely on each other and work the land and work animals. So there was more open mindedness, there was more objectivity, and less selfishness. But today's human apparently is a completely different animal. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And there's a lot of, I mean, this is where you could almost cross over into sort of Gnostic territory, right?
Yeah.
Talking about demiurgical distractions that have been layered upon us in the past at least 100 years. You know, hmm. Yeah, I guess what I would be interested in seeing is like how how small is that success rate? In other words, like, is this if you're dealing with a planet of are we at 8 billion people yet? If you're dealing with a planet of 8 billion people, is that success rate like five, or is that success rate numbering in the millions, which is still a high failure rate? You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
I see people who have successfully integrated their experiences from near death thing to
Mhm.
altered states of consciousness to spiritual, all these things, right? Um, and it seems like maybe those are success stories. Would you think that's a proper assessment,
Yeah,
or do you think do you think the success rate is like five or three?
I hear you. I think it really depends on what you would define success as. So, with what you're talking about, you would probably know more than me, and I'm okay with that. For me, looking at it from the apparently non-human perspective, if the person's going to come here and there's like a 99% chance that they're going to wind up, say, whatever today's equivalent is of being crucified like allegedly Jesus was, why would they want to come here and risk that, especially if then they're dealing with having amnesia walls and all of that negativity around them and whatnot? So for me that makes sense, and I would put the success rate then at successful integration at being maybe at 0.5%.
Right,
That's my opinion.
right. That's an interesting way to look at it. I
Mhm.
mean, that's always the big question, right? Is
Mhm.
you hear people emerging from these experiences with a sense of mission, but the mission is so rarely retained in any sort of clear way. And then when it comes back, it there is sort of a vague shape to the types of missions that are described. In terms of being positive and caring and nurturing and understanding and et cetera. But like as far as like concrete action, um, it's
That's
always remains pretty vague, and definitely in terms of like global elevations of consciousness. Sometimes you hear back from experiencers that their job is to sort of raise awareness of these things and raise vibrations and consciousness of the collective of humanity. That seems to be a failure as well.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
that puts it all into some perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. The way the way that I've come to understand and experience this is that, okay, if we have non-human people who are going to be born into this human society, they might look a bit different. They definitely will have a completely different psychology, in my
Right.
understanding. They might not be able to tolerate certain environmental factors. They might also not be able to eat the food. They might have completely different like genetic dietary needs. And all of that paints a target on that person for harassment, danger, and whatnot. But then
Right.
you probably are going to have completely different energy signatures and vibratory signatures. And I know that human people pick up on that seemingly subconsciously and they react to that. So there's another level of difficulty and danger. Then, if human people are thinking that that non-human person doesn't know what they're talking about, they think that that person is arrogant or crazy or whatever.
Mhm.
It just really, why would anyone then want to come here unless there is a safety plan and a way forward? And then what is success at that point? What
Right.
I understand is that it is dealing with people one on one, the human person, and helping them to work through whatever insecurities, traumas, um, you could say even like negativities or antisocial traits. Because
Mhm.
if we look back largely at, say, the lore of a lot of fairy and or alien civilizations, they are extremely pro-social, and there's the idea of the
Mhm.
hive mind.
Right.
What if that just means that they are all deeply connected at the heart and the root, and they feel each other's joys, pains, successes, all of that?
Mhm.
And what if it could be said that maybe um, if human people could be open enough to accept that type of a person coming into their society, that kind of person could also bring in and teach ways for the human individual to raise their own vibration so that the locus of control becomes internal for that human person, and they're not focused on, say, bringing in certain globalist ideas or trying to advance the materialistic parts of the human belief in progress. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It's. I mean, that's sort of the refrain that you hear from a lot of these stories is this idea of sort of monist interpretation of oneness and us all being connected and everything being connected to everything else. It is a balancing act to provide for the collective while also seeing to the needs of the individual and treating the individual as individual.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, that's in a lot of ways, that's the constant struggle that we see unfolding across civilization after civilization is trying to express that tension in a way that benefits all parties involved.
Mhm.
Um, but this kind of puts me in a sad place that this mission is failing. Like we're all.
It's not failing, I don't think, in some ways. It's just that the risk is so high and it has to be done apparently so very carefully
Mhm.
that I think it would take a really strong person to want to come here and handle all of that and to be able to have the humility to just work one on one, whereas everything seems to be so,
Right. Well, I'm
um,
putting the mindset of, like as far as what the ufologists would call the ET agenda, what that
mhm.
is. I mean, there does seem to be um apt apt unfolding. What's the word I'm looking for? There's a better way to put this. This targeted approach. That's a better way to put it. A
Yeah.
targeted approach in the UFO phenomenon to work at the collective and the individual level. So, at the collective level, there is this expression of changing what I call the temperature in the room, or changing the level of discourse around these topics, and that seems to be succeeding a great deal. But at the same
Yes.
time, there is a very personalized aspect of the phenomenon, that phenomenon in particular, all these, I guess you could argue, that is that is directly engaging with the individual, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so you operate at the individual level to bring about that sort of personal disclosure of these phenomena. But then you also foster an environment at the cultural level that makes the individuals comfortable coming forward with how they feel.
Now you're getting it. Yep.
Yeah, and that seems to be on a successful track, it really does.
Mhm.
The fact that it would be juxtaposed against so much geopolitical instability, I think is interesting. And probably is important to the conversation as well. But yeah. Hmm.
Yes, it is. It is. Um, all of the
Well, see,
non-human,
sorry,
oh,
go ahead. No,
all of the
I
non.
was, mhm. No, you go.
Okay, I was going to say, my friend, that every non-human person that I have ever met, has explained to me explicitly that the human need and or desire for rulership is evil, meaning that it is destructive, it is combative and nonsensical, at least to them. And I agree. I do not support or believe in any government or any religion. I see everything from the inside and the micro outwards. And
Mhm.
so for me, I don't vote. I won't discuss um, government. I feel comfortable doing it with you, but typically I don't because I don't believe in it whatsoever. I see what I believe are the evils that it does, and I see how people can seem to lose their minds about government and religion. And I just don't think it's necessary at all. And that's also been something that the non-human people that I've worked with have really validated for me. And from descriptions I've gotten from them, there is no government elsewhere. There might be a social hierarchy based on certain types of merit, but it is not government. Anything that is apparently given to them is earned through organic understanding and respect, if that makes sense.
Well, it occurs to me that, everything like a religion or a government is an attempt to organize and grapple with the way that existence should be, or the way that you should position yourself within this plurality of intelligences, this plurality of presences. And when you're not here on Earth, when you're in these other places, whatever you want to call them, you're interfacing with how it is as opposed to how it should be, or how, so that seems to make some degree of sense, if I articulated that half sensibly.
I think you
um
did.
so yeah, but that's another reason that, like, I have this, I view the hybrid narrative, and you can take a look at that in the changeling folklore, take a look at
Mhm.
that in the alien stuff as well. I view the hybrid narrative, at least as it's most prominently portrayed in the UFO literature, as being, this nefarious attempt to colonize Earth, or, or save their own species. But, like, it just doesn't seem to me. Let me know if you agree with this or not.
Sure.
If there were material human alien hybrids, we should be able to determine that a lot more easily than we have, through some sort of genetic testing or something like that. Similarly, I've met quite a few people who have told me that they are, you know, fairy hybrids, right? But I'm not sure that a genetic test, it would it I'm open to the fact that it would reveal some anomalies, but I don't think it would come back with, this person is half unknown, So I tend to view this hybridization narrative as operating more on that metaphysical level. So it's true, but it's not. But we're not talking about things that are operating in this materialist framework. We're talking about things that transcend that. So it's unambiguously true in that place. But here, the truth of that uh, mixture of the human and then the more than human, or other types of people, whatever you want to call it, that truth gets muddled, and I don't think it's a truth to be discussed or disclosed here. It's a truth operating at a different level. Does that seem fair?
I
Does that
think that
assessment seem fair?
Yeah, I think that seems fair. And my understanding is that genetics, depending upon the timeline, are a lot more malleable than what human people tend to think.
Hmm.
And that the details are more important than just a yes or no answer, because the details are where the yes or the no is. So this is why it's really important for me. Part of the message that I bring to humankind is to not focus so much on whether a person is or is not genetically human. I think
Right.
it's far more important to focus on that person's character, what they bring to themselves and to others and to society.
Right.
I'm anti-tribalistic personally. This is just me. So for me, what I understand is that the anomalies that you mentioned are crucially important to understanding a person's genetic profile.
Mhm.
And then I personally, I believe that there is a deep genetic difference, but that human tests are not sensitive enough to pick it up.
I'm completely open to that as well. But see, herein lies the sort of tension again between traditional ethology and the things that you and I are interested in, because they want to sort of catalog these anomalies within this system that we're operating within, with the tools that we have. And of course, we always think that we're the apex of technology and development, and, like, it doesn't get more refined than what we're doing now, right? That's the fairy tale that we always tell ourselves. Um, but like, that's why I feel like yes, the hybridity issue should be explored, but you're going in the wrong direction. There's a quote, and I believe it's from the Habits of Successful People, one of those, sort of
Oh
was
yeah,
in the 90s. Yeah, that book. It talks about, it talks about when you're climbing the ladder, make sure that it's propped against the correct wall,
yeah,
So,
yeah,
and I feel like it's one of those situations where, hey, you're sort of making progress, but it's headed in a direction that I don't it's headed in a direction that I think will lead to a dead end eventually if
yeah.
you're examining these things from that perspective. And whereas, if you approach the issue of hybridity more along the lines of something that has to do with soulcraft, I think that's going to continue to yield dividends long after you've reached the end of that other hallway.
Hmm. Right. I do agree with you. And to humanity, then I would just encourage maybe people to think about treating other types of people more as individuals and try to be more open-minded and accepting that there might be vibrational or genetic differences. But if you can get past that tribalistic attitude, I mean, who knows what kind of timeline you could wind up in? Who knows who might be
Mm.
drawn to you to interact with you to help you along your journey? It's just like you said, putting the ladder against the wrong wall. People, I hear human people say all the time, we want unity. We want to learn more about these things. We want to meet these people and all of that. But okay, are you giving the kind of love that you want to get?
Well, unity is too often misconstrued by the people asking for unity as conformity, Like
I
it's
agree.
we don't want unity, we just want you to see things the way that we do. And then
Uh,
then we'll have unity, you know.
uh, they're
And
tyrannical.
yeah, yeah, and it's always the sign to me of someone who is has put in the work, the intellectual work to be able to exist with contradictory ideas in their head and to say, well, I see the strengths in both of these things and to try to find the middle road. And I think there's not a lot of that going on
Yeah,
nowadays. I mean, but if you ask me, like I've said this before, like when dealing with these phenomena, my my true basket in my head is very small, and my false basket in my head is very small, and my interesting of true basket is enormous, and it's
I
that,
love that.
and it's sitting with these contradictory ideas,
Mhm.
and trying to find a way to reconcile them, and then also being okay with not being able to reconcile. I think that's
Yes.
an important thing
Yeah.
too. But in when you're dealing with stuff that has lived implications in this reality that you cannot reconcile, then you should default to things like compassion and things like treating people as individuals in that respect, like you were talking about. That's when the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, but isn't that what the hybrid thing is, right? It's the union of opposites, right?
It
It's the
is.
coincidentia oppositorum. It's two things that should not belong together, finding a way to exist together.
Yep.
And there's a lesson in that, I think.
Mm, I agree. I completely agree. In my understanding, a hybrid person would be the ultimate liminality because they
Mhm.
have one foot equally here in the physical, but then certainly one foot elsewhere. And I think that that could be really valuable for human people to think about what benefits could be offered to humankind to interact with these types of people, to learn from them. And two, I think getting into the old fairy tales, I think maybe that this is subconsciously why human people have been fascinated with the tales of non-human and human marriages and the creation of hybrids. Maybe subconsciously human people recognize that there is perhaps some truth and value in this type of liminality. And I would like to see a resurgence in that, you know?
Well, throw onto that pile also this the concept of polypsychism, the idea that, you have multiple aspects of yourself that we would have called the soul that are existing within you simultaneously and not always in accordance with each other.
Yeah,
Um, you know, and I mean, and we talk about this like we believe it, but we don't. We say, "Oh, my head wants to do this, but my heart wants to do that." That sort of thing.
yeah,
Um, but I think there might be something to that as well, to be brought into the whole discussion of hybridity and how we take these concepts up with compassion moving forward.
I agree. I agree. And two, you're talking about polypsychism. This is something that I've been told a lot about from non-human people. And I'm very open and honest with people that I've been diagnosed as having very, very low ego content and very, very low emotional content. So it feels natural and normal to me when these non-human people say, we have a kaleidoscope of access to our own soul fragments, and we have developed them into full and complete egos that we can grab at any point in time to play whatever a human person needs at that time. And we can also
Mhm.
jump timelines. We can or jump vibrations and dimensions to a certain point. And so this gets into trickster uh,
Hmm.
mythology and whatnot. And what I find really interesting is that human people tend to have the one solid, firm ego. And then they have just that little touch of polypsychism going on. Meanwhile, out there, it is seemingly completely different. But when we have, say, a hybrid person, what if they could access the best of both? You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, this has been, as you sort of alluded to, this has been talked about in fiction so often. This idea of, hybridity being the best of both worlds. I'm thinking of the vampire hunters who are half vampire and can work in the day. But it's also, I mean, but it's also, it's the philosopher's stone, and it's the incarnation of Jesus Christ being God and man, and it's all these ideas that we have dealt with, and and in that sense, it could be viewed evolutionary, right? It's because it is the integration of something more than human. But again, not the way that we normally talk about evolution as
Yeah.
being, the selection of traits to improve a species over time. Yeah. But again, these are all the conversations that get avoided when you talk with the ufologists, and they focus on gestational sacs and rows of incubated hybrid babies in test tubes and stuff like that. And it really is missing the forest for the trees, I think, um, because it's not what the message of the whole UFO thing is pointing us towards. It's pointing us towards stuff like we're talking about today.
I agree. I agree. And when I've studied older texts about hybridization and human non-human romantic relationships, it really does seem to me that it's not about gestation tanks, sacs, and all of that. It is about mental, emotional, and genetic meshing in a very natural way, whether it is happening here purely in the most physical plane, what we call the
Hmm.
3D, or if it's happening at a plane a little bit higher where maybe some non-human people can retreat to, or they need to retreat to, in order to retain the incarnation that they are currently in and in order to have the healthy baby. And maybe too that's where it becomes necessary to have a human midwife, because maybe they can't perform all of the physical labor that is
Hmm.
needed, and human people know this realm far better than them, it would seem. So it just, I don't know, it seems natural to me that it's more about nurturing and meshing than it is the gestation sacs. And oh man, that the term just gives me willies.
Well, I mean, but you're right. I mean, treating the UFO topic literature seriously, treating the UFO topic, the UFO literature seriously and literally. I've got a pin because I'm writing this down, so I think it's insightful, but burned out of this
Nice.
conversation.
Sure.
Um, is a bit like treating any other myth or story seriously, right? And or rather literally, I guess, right? Hold on, I'm gonna write this down.
Oh, you're fine. Please take your time.
Uh, yeah, I just
Take
I
your time.
want to yeah, treating the UFO literally is like treating myths and stories literally, and it's do I think that um Perseus literally faced the Gorgon? Not really, but I think that that story reveals metaphorical truths that are applied to the lives of everybody who's retold that to. And even if they don't consciously realize it, they're still um onboarding some of the themes in these stories about, and that's probably Perseus and the Gorgon and all that. It's probably not the best example, but we know that these the reason that these myths and legends have endured is because they encode aspects of character and aspects of one's own life and things and the monsters that they are guaranteed to face rather than some of these literal monsters. And yet we turn around with the UFO topic and we treat it like the evening news. It seems to be operating on that original that mythic level rather than it does of the other the sort of literal level. Yeah.
Gotcha. So do you think personally that there are that there are hybrid people still here and or that they ever were?
I
What is your
mean,
take?
in the sense that we were talking about, I mean, in the sense that if there are genetic anomalies, they're probably imperceptible. Yeah, I do. Um, in this sort of David Jacobs style, half human, half alien, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that there's something that's a literal obvious genetic admixture of human and something material. But in terms of functioning on that spiritual level, and or in terms of having genetic anomalies that could be perhaps revealed with an advance in technology, then yes. That makes sense.
I think so. So you do think that there are like the physical hybrids? Is that what you're saying or no?
I mean, I'm open to the possibility of physical hybrids, but for the most part, I tend to view it on that sort of metaphysical level. And my current thinking on reincarnation is kind of part and parcel of this, where I don't think that reincarnation. I suspect that reincarnation exists in some form or fashion. I don't think that it's a one-to-one um, transfer, right? So like when somebody steps forward and they say, hi, I was Napoleon Bonaparte in a past life, I don't think that it's the entirety of Bonaparte in this new person. I think that a part of them was
Mhm.
once Napoleon Bonaparte because I think that everything gets sort of swirled around and sloshed up on the other
Yeah.
side of this veil. Because I mean, and that's the only way that I can sort of reconcile things like the fact that we seem to have more people than ever before on this planet, and the fact that you might get 12 people who all say that they were Napoleon Bonaparte. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like it can be a one-to-one transfer of an entire soul to an entire soul. So in that case, then we're hybridized with everything, right? We're hybridized with um any sort of living soul energy, but also any sort of living energy of other things that are ensouled in an anima system as well, which could include, actual literal extraterrestrials that die and return to that same source. Again, completely speculative, but that's just the way that I tend to reconcile these different narratives in my.
Okay. I think that that makes sense. And I was just curious, like, what your explicit opinion was about that, because you and I talk a lot about these types of things,
Right,
but I never actually thought to ask you specifically until
right.
now.
I just think that if we took the hybrid narrative literally, and it's not to say that we haven't seen anomalies when people have had their biological material tested, but I think that we would see more anomalies than we have. There would be more of a smoking gun. But at the same time, I think that the there's a possibility for this metaphysical hybridization to manifest genetic anomalies that have yet to be documented. That's probably the best way to put it. So I predominantly view it as a metaphysical thing. I have met too many people that have these odd experiences. I'm also not convinced that like you can't become a hybrid, that you can't start out your life um, as a mundane human and have an extraordinary experience that sort of does hybridize you in the way that we're talking. Um,
Mhm.
you know, uh, and there are allusions to experiencers who go and have their DNA altered or things like that. And again, I would think that that is a sort of metaphorical expression of the way that they are changed on the other side of it. And please understand, like a lot of what I'm saying right now is kind of speaking off the cuff about this,
Sure.
and I'm completely open to having my opinion changed. And I've probably misspoken like 3 dozen times over the course of this because
Okay.
I haven't sort of gathered together and finessed my thoughts on it as much as perhaps I should have. But yeah, I tend to lean towards the idea that it's a metaphysical expression
Okay.
or spiritual expression. Yeah.
I think that's okay, and I think that's fair. And I, I don't want to say that your opinion is just flat out wrong. I do think that your opinion is accurate in some cases. It's just from what I understand that there is a physical element to some of these people. So, for example,
Well,
I do
right.
fully. Oh,
I was going to say it's sort of tying in what we were talking about earlier, the fact that these things seem to exist in both of these domains, right? The physical and the
yeah. Um, my understanding is that there are some non-human people who may walk amongst human people, but they look exactly like human beings, and they've come here to inhabit a human body, but they retain the psychology of a non-human person. And so they are
Mhm.
mimicked in that way. But
Yeah,
then I understand that there are some people who have obvious, or maybe not so obvious, depending on the opinion, genetic quirks, as well as different psychology and whatnot. And that I think that that is where we get into there being more of a physical hybrid. And then I think too that there are human people who they're living a perfectly human existence. They have a near death experience, they go beyond the veil, and then they come back with a brand new psychology from maybe non-human family that also affects the vibration of the body, which then changes the genetic expression. That's my
right.
understanding. What do you
Well,
think
and
about that?
I also think this brings up the question of whether or not we've properly identified the root causes of certain conditions or syndromes or mental illnesses. I mean, in other words, we like to put them all into this box of like being completely natural outgrowths of human physiology or psychology, but that doesn't mean that we have that we don't have that completely wrong.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that we have misattributed the source of these things. I mean, a good example of that is some of the doctors who are working with schizophrenia patients who are encouraging to engage with the voices, right? So
Exactly.
if that's the case with a mental condition, then why couldn't that be the case with certain genetic markers that we say, oh, in this population, they tend to have this particular mark. I don't know enough about genetics to speak on it, but like, or this certain attribute. Yeah, we see it in certain. It's hereditary. It's in certain. It's attributed to certain bloodlines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that doesn't mean that its origin point isn't something strange or that it doesn't carry some extra weight that we have yet to comprehend. So I think that's a real possibility too.
All right, everyone. So we are out of time. I regret to say. This has been Joshua Cutchin. I have been Tilly Treadwell. And Josh, where could we learn more about you and what you're up to?
Oh, that's joshuacutchin.com, JOSHUACUTCHIN.com.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for stopping by. Until next time, I wish you a merry morning or a magical midnight.